I would say quite an interesting, for me, psychological change. I'm not good at repeating things. I'm strange in the way that I won't take the same route in and out of a place, walking or driving. I love novelty. And one of the things I had to learn is like, okay, you're not in working in PR anymore, is you don't know how to cook professionally. You just have to be humble, say that I don't know how to do this, and learn. Don't beat yourself up saying, oh, I'm an idiot or whatever. Just learn. And how you learn is by repetition, which is cooking.
Welcome to the My SGV podcast. Our mission is to capture and share the stories of the people of the San Gabriel Valley. We believe our diversity is what makes the SGV great. And no matter where you're from in the San Gabriel Valley, you will feel welcome.
All right, SGVers, welcome back to another episode of the My SGV podcast. Thank you for tuning in and spending your time with us. If you are new here, we bring you the stories of the people of the San Gabriel Valley. Please consider subscribing if you like that kind of stuff. And if you are a returning listener, we do appreciate you spending this time with us. Well, Scott, you have a daughter in England right now, right? Going to school there?
She's getting a master's degree, living in London, and I lived in England a little bit, a very short period of time, like for a summer. But I've always been an Anglophile, they call them, just a lover of England or all things English. I have a fascination with England.
I remember I made a Monty Python reference, and you knew it. And I was like,
"Oh, is that right?"
Yeah. So it's but a scratch, and and you.
Oh, yeah, I remember from a Monty Python movie.
Yes.
Yeah, right, where they cut off all the arms and legs. And
yes,
the guy wanted to fight on.
But it's the humor that you.
Like really, the British wit is just incredible. Yeah, I'm reading a book right now written by an English author, and I just love the dialogue and the dry wit. It's just something that I don't see it in the States, this kind of humor.
And how many times have you been to England?
Oh, I've only been there maybe 3 times. I went there and lived there for 3 months, and then I had a couple other visits. That's it.
Well, I've not had the opportunity to go there. I definitely want to visit one day, but I'm excited to hear about that place and the relation to the San Gabriel Valley with our guest today. But before we get into that, thank you to Paris Baguette for supplying the tasty treats for our show. It's always a challenge to resist, and we had a cancellation. Actually, Scott, I didn't tell you we had a cancellation, so we have extra boxes here that we'll have to resist or give away,
or fight for, just like the Monty Python movie,
So go check them out, Paris Baguette in San Gabriel. Thank you for providing those for us. Well, let's introduce our guest. She is a British-born Chinese chef now living in LA, and she creates these Canto flavor meat pies. Her business is called Dai Pie Dong, and her name is Kitty Lam. Kitty, welcome to the show.
Hi. Yeah, nice to meet everyone.
Thank you for coming. So Dai Pie Dong, that's it. Did I describe that correctly? They're Canto style meat pies?
Okay, so I like to call them British style pastries with Chinese or Cantonese inspired fillings.
Okay.
So if I'm sure there's a few Cantonese speakers out there in San Gabriel Valley that might get the name, but without seeing, you might not get the pun. So it's called Dai Pie Dong, like a Dai Pie Dong, the street hawker stores that are famous in Hong Kong and sadly are dying out also. But the pie of Dai Pie Dong is pie, as in a actual pie. So the pun actually works in English and Chinese. The translation in Chinese would be big licensed stall, and with the pie replaced with a pie, it becomes a big pie stall. So it kind of works both ways. It's punny. We're talking about
there's that British humor,
exactly.
Right? You can't stop it.
Exactly. I had such a long time, spitballing with my friends, like, what am I going to call this? And finally it came to me in a dream. Has to be a pun. Dai Pie Dong.
Well, I want to get into the story there,
Yes.
but if listeners haven't figured out by now, maybe you were not born here in the San Gabriel Valley.
I was wondering how we're going to segue into this. Like, it is like imposter syndrome. Like, wait a minute, I don't live in San Gabriel Valley, nor do I work here. How on earth am I on this podcast? Well, simply this. I somehow traveled 6,000 miles in the wrong direction and found myself closer to China. It's a really interesting journey for me to arrive in this massive city, even bigger than my hometown of London, and to discover, this is the biggest Chinese community outside of China living in San Gabriel Valley. And in my journey to be a chef, I worked in a completely different industry before that. I found myself cooking French food in culinary college, going, this is great, but what am I doing? I want to wok. I want to make Chinese food. So as soon as I got here and I was able to get a job with the whole green card thing, I sought out a contemporary Chinese restaurant to work in. And through that, my colleagues, my friends, they all live in San Gabriel Valley. Through that, I visited San Gabriel Valley so much to eat the food here. And in some ways, it's become, a location that's brought out my Chinese identity. And that's how I ended up on this podcast.
Yeah, I thought that was a really unique tie-in to the show. And I remember speaking to you that you, forgive me if my memory is not correct, that
Sure.
you didn't feel that living in London.
Well, I hate to bring out the stats, but I mean, there's about 70 million people in the entirety of United Kingdom, which is smaller than California. And there's only something like maybe 150,000 Chinese people. Okay, there's the whole thing of the different visa situation in Hong Kong, which has brought more people. Let's round up to 200,000 out of 70 million people. I mean, statistically, it's less than 1%, isn't it? If I've got my maths right. It's not the same.
Scott's a human calculator, so
It's
It is
just
less than,
proliferation of Chinese people and Chinese community, that how the diaspora is interlinked with American society is just something so unbelievable,
I didn't realize there were that few Chinese in England. I would have thought a lot because of the Hong Kong,
It's less
sort
than
of
you
the
think.
immigration from Hong Kong. Really surprising. But I do know that, I was told recently that the Chinatown in London is fairly small.
It's one street.
Yeah,
Gerrard Street.
It's like a 1 square block or something.
Yeah, not even a block. It's literally, you could walk from one end to the other in less than 5 minutes.
Wow, that's shocking.
Yes.
I didn't know that. I guess a lot of Indian people, so a lot more Indian than Chinese.
It's a different part of British history. I mean, we're going to have to go there, right? Colonialism, dun, dun, dun. The Indian part of London is more the East End. Brick Lane is probably the most famous part with all the curry houses and stuff. But Chinatown's an interesting one. I don't remember quite the history of why it's there, but you would be shocked to find it's what they call the West End, which is the theatre district.
Right.
And the kind of traditional, I would even say, pubs and restaurant part of central London. It's where our Times Square is, which is Piccadilly Circus, and then you've got all the side streets of Soho and things, which, it spreads out beyond Gerrard Street. You can see all the signs are in English and Chinese for quite a while outside of this area. It's intermingled with Soho, Piccadilly Circus, Chinatown. I mean, I guess it's more the scale. It's just such a more older, smaller city.
And you mentioned that the Chinese connection to the U.S. was a little bit surprising to you.
I guess, it's funny, if we talk about some stereotypes, I had really no picture of what it would be like to live in LA before I got here. You hear about maybe in the South, there's more of like the black community, right? But I don't know why, I just assumed everyone would be a bit more mixed in, like in London, maybe because you don't have a choice and it's so dense. And I was really surprised to find, there's a literal entire valley of Chinese people. And other regions, little Bangladesh, little Ethiopia. I'm just talking about restaurants here, never mind the community of people. I did not have the foggiest idea of the notion of communities being able to build in parts of LA, maybe because of the sprawl. I'm speculating here, but it makes sense. Why would you not want to make a community of like-minded people, similar, ethnic backgrounds?
Well, why did you come to LA?
Oh, that's a side story. So my last life, I used to work in PR. I used to work in the games industry. And this is when I was living in Germany. I told you it's complicated. And I met my partner who was promoting his game. And, well, I guess that's just one of those strange stories, There's so many things that could have happened that we would never have met. We met this one day, sometime in August 2014, and,
And he was based in LA?
Yes.
Oh,
and eventually I was like, well, I guess I'm moving to America.
Well, how do you identify? I mean, you've got your hometown is London.
Yes.
You state it that way. Your family lives there?
That's right. My mom and dad and my brother.
Okay. So that's home?
Mm-hmm.
What's LA? What's LA?
I guess I suppose it's all, I tend to see it as an interesting thing. Being British-born Chinese, and as I mentioned, meeting a few colleagues who are American-born Chinese, you played a strange game as you're growing up, going like, oh no, I'm British. And then you're like, oh no, but I'm Chinese. And then you look at your own DNA, you're like, wait a minute, both my parents are from Kowloon in Hong Kong, and they met in London, in the 70s. It's just randomness, right? And you spend so much time kind of trying to work out what your identity is. Like, I don't speak fluent Chinese. Does that diminish my Chineseness? I grew up in the British schooling system, it is a strange part of, I guess, growing up somewhere where it's not your true identity. So I digress. So LA's a funny one. I've always thought the city it's not the sort of place you come to find yourself. You need to know yourself. It's what makes LA unique. There's so much opportunity and you can mold it to what you want it to be. I never got the feeling you're going to get here and, disappear and, become a new person. I think it's a place you build on an idea or a dream.
Oh, that you've already had, you mean?
Yeah. So for me, it was the chase. I want to be a chef. I don't want to work in PR anymore. And I was already, shifting as I was on my way out of the UK. As I said, I went to culinary college and such. But I think that's what's very appealing about I hate to say it, what's left of what the American dream, or whatever that might mean these days, but at least the desire to chase something you're interested in and the opportunity to do that through people's enthusiasm.
You don't think you could have done that in England?
I don't think so. I mean, hey, I'm a pie maker, right? There's a million pies in the UK. I don't think it would stick out as much. I'm not sure. It's a tough one.
Did you want to leave England, or you wanted to come here because of your partner?
I came here because my partner lived here, but I also saw it as an opportunity. It wasn't my first rodeo. I lived abroad already, as I mentioned, in Germany. I guess it was just like, life's an adventure. I was at that point when I've been seeing this fella for, 5 years? What are we going to do now? Is it going to continue? Is it not? And if we were going to continue, we had to close this gap of 6,000 miles. I had to laugh when my mum asked me where I moved to in the US. So I went, see that continent? See how there's not anything left of the continent, the ocean's there. I'm right there, literally end of the other side of America, right?
For now, I mean, yes. This may be the ocean at some point.
Yeah, I don't think in my lifetime. But yeah, if I can identify with LA, I guess it's about, it's a meanness. Like I said, I don't think it's a city to find yourself. I feel much more confident in saying, hey, this is the thing I want to do. I am a chef. I'm interested in Chinese food. I guess that's really cemented that in coming here.
Do you see a difference in American people versus British people?
Insofar as?
Attitude, perspective, education, accent.
I think we obviously we'll start with the accent. It's just a thing, right? it's just a different way of pronouncing words, and I'll get to that. I find an illusion with my Hong Kongness, right? I'm speaking a dying dialect. Eventually...
You're talking about Cantonese?
I'm talking about British English.
Oh.
There's only 70 million of us, but I'm also speaking Cantonese, which is also a dying dialect in a way. And I find that funny because that's how I see British English. Everyone's like, oh, no, you're not speaking proper English. No, I'm speaking British English. This is its own dialect. In the same way, you're speaking American English, which is your dialect. I would find it, somewhat untrue to say to you, that's not proper pronounced, Queen's English or whatever. Well, of course it isn't. That's not what you speak. You're speaking a different dialect. It's the same way I'm speaking a different dialect of Chinese, which is Cantonese. And that's how I see it. Yeah.
Wow, I never thought of the fact that you feel British English is a dying
I think it
language.
is. I mean, even my lexicon, it's completely invaded by Americanisms. But a lot of the times, the words I'm using may not have the same context. One that drives me nuts, on a plane. And they go, in America, the plane will be landing momentarily. And I'm like, what, you mean it's going to touch down and then take off again? Because for me, momentarily means it's lasting a moment.
Oh.
Whereas in American English, it's meaning it's going to happen in a moment. And this is what I mean. Same words, completely different meanings. You have that in Chinese as well. And
then you have their crazy habit of calling a sports team, as if it's singular or plural or whatever.
Well, you know what everyone says about LA,
crazy.
which I find really funny. They say, you can tell Angelina, but they call it the 405, or I'm driving on the 10. Well, Londoners do that. British people do that. I'm on the M25. Which is the ring road around London. That's just how we call roads, right? I think there's definitely a lot of differences. We'll start with the language, like I said, as the dialect. I don't know. I almost feel a little uncomfortable by saying, I can define Britishness and its differences to you as an American, because I'm not saying I'm not, but, I've come at it completely differently,
Are you British or Chinese?
Depends on what side of the bed I get up out of. But right now I feel more Chinese. But, it's funny. Sometimes I dream in English. Sometimes I dream in Chinese. I guess it depends what I'm up to. Yeah.
And what does Chinese mean to you?
Well, I think having worked with so many people and engaged with SGV, I mean, they call them, San Gabriel kids, right? People who grew up here. I realize how more Chinese I am, than I ever realized. And that's interesting. If anything, if we're talking about identity again, it makes you feel a little bit like, there is still some Chinese somewhere buried in there. But I guess, I just guess it depends on the context. Everybody code switches, right? Depending on who they're talking to and such.
Have you been to Hong Kong?
Yeah, many times.
Many times. You have family there?
Yeah, my mum and dad are there right now, actually. I've probably been about 5 or 6 times.
And when you go there, how do you feel?
How do I feel? I guess something resonates in me, like a tuning fork. You kind of go like, okay, this is where I come from. Like just the temperature, there's something about it. The mishmash, like even Cantonese as a Hong Kong person or connected to Hong Kong people from my parents, you speak a Chenglish, right? You mix Chinese, Cantonese with English, and it's kind of funny how that all gets mashed up together. Sometimes I'm scared if I speak to somebody, like, oh crap, how much of this is Cantonese mixed with English, because I'm so used to it in Hong Kong. I can't think of an example right now.
How do you feel as a British Chinese going to Hong Kong in terms of the history? I mean, I'm trying to keep it historical versus political.
It's a funny one. I haven't been there since 2016, so I don't really know the extent of anything that's changed. It's hard for me to comment on it. I think if you know anything about Hong Kong people, they're pretty tenacious, fiery type of Chinese people. I mean, going back to language again, the whole simplified Chinese thing, if we talk about politics, was during the whole Chairman Mao era, right?
Of course, yeah.
I mean, maybe get philosophical here, to control language controls your expression, right? But Hong Kong people did not take on simplified Chinese. They kept.
But talk about political and talk about a dying language. Mandarin is taking over.
Well, it's
at least on the surface.
It's country dictated, but yeah, everyone on the street would be speaking Cantonese. And I think maybe this harks a bit back to, why I embarked on cooking Cantonese or modern Cantonese cooking. It's like, wait a minute, it's up to me. If you look at a lot of people in my generation who are, a younger generation cooking Chinese now, they're not doing it because they're forced to. My father is actually a Chinese chef. I avoided it for years. I was like, I'm not doing that. I'm not interested. And somehow, first at the age of about 36, I went full circle and went, okay, I'm cooking Chinese now. Fine, let's do it.
So is any part of that political?
Cooking?
Choosing Cantonese?
No, I think it's just more interesting. Like, why would I cook French food? I have no connection to it. Chinese food, over 2,000 years of history, maybe more. It's just the pure breadth of it is just...
Oh, it's incredible,
so
isn't
much
it?
more fun.
And you're just talking about Cantonese as one of several types of Chinese cooking, but then within Cantonese...
Yes. And I think what's funny about Cantonese is, what do they say? There's something like 9 schools of Chinese cooking, depending on how you count it, sorry. But just looking at, you look at Cantonese cooking, it's like we're talking about sweeter dishes, very much about seafood and the natural flavors of the food, quickly cooked in a wok, and you go up to the north somewhere like Beijing, and suddenly there's flour and there's potatoes, because that just didn't grow in the south. So you've got types of bread, you've got these things called bing, which are fantastic. They're like wraps, and it's a completely different cuisine because they have a completely different biome and things that are cooking there. That's just 2 different ends of the compass, the north and the south. Yeah.
I'm curious what it was like growing up. Did you have a lot of opportunity to experience your own food, like Chinese food in London, or was all your cuisine mostly British cuisine?
I think that's a fantastic question. So the cuisine I had growing up at home was 100% Chinese.
100% right? Chinese.
Because I have a little cheat code. My father's a chef. So when he had his day off once a week, he would cook these elaborate meals. And, I have a fond memory of, salt and pepper squid and all these great dishes, pineapple, stir-fried beef and things like that. I have a memory of him making dumplings as a side hustle for his friend, giant boards with all these dumplings. Like my mother's also a pretty great cook, but I would say she really found her groove when I was in my teenage years. I think it's interesting when you talk about food because that's my life now. But one of the most, I would say I eat everything, right? And I think that's a really basic way of putting it. But then you look at my parents who moved to the UK in the 70s, and I would say they're a little picky. They'll leave London for 3 days, and then my mum will go, okay, you got to turn the car back. We've got to go home and eat Chinese food. I can't deal with it anymore. But Chinese food in the UK has a funny rep, I think Americans hear this stereotype that, English food is terrible. And it's like, well, when did you last go to London? It's got some of the best food in Europe, never mind the world.
now.
Yes.
But when I lived there
what year was
40
that?
Years ago,
yes.
You had to find an Indian restaurant or a Chinese restaurant.
Right. That better.
Yeah, because you don't want to eat British food, English food. I never wanted to, except fish and chips.
All right. But
you eat blood pudding or...
I love it.
Oh, my goodness, really?
So one of the restaurants, actually, that I did my internship in during my culinary, schooling, was St. John, which is a restaurant that's quite known for what they call nose-to-tail eating. everything from the animal, very respectful. And I always found that very aligned with a Chinese view on cooking.
It is.
But that restaurant is quite well known for, almost repopularizing these ugly sides of meat, offal. I mean, let's call it by its real name. And it's become trendy again. And if you ever go to a restaurant and eat a bone marrow dish, that restaurant popularized that about 20 years ago. Yeah.
Really? Oh, one of my favorite.
Yeah.
Well, I don't imagine there was like a 99 ranch if there's only one street.
Yeah, no. So 99 Ranch is a funny one. When I first came here, I went, "What is this? This is a whole supermarket, like actual supermarket, with Chinese food, in a very palatable way. It's not a grimy cash and carry. It's like a proper supermarket for everyone." I was when I saw that. So. Yeah, in the UK, they're mostly cash and carries. So there's one called Wing Yip, for example, which is a big yellow, like a Chinese IKEA. It's just filled, floor to ceiling, as you can imagine, with Chinese goods. But it's really like a cash and carry, basically.
I see.
Yeah.
Well, Kitty, we ask each guest to bring an item of significance with them. What did you bring with you today?
Brilliant. I'm going to try and be careful.
Just don't use it, please.
Yeah, here it is. This is my cleaver. This is actually made by a Hong Kong-based knife maker, but I bought in San Gabriel Valley. And I bought it because I needed a Chinese knife. And I got here and I started working at this restaurant. And I'm kind of embarrassed at first of using all my French knives. And I kind of went, I need to go buy one. So my boss actually took me to a place called Action Sales, which is, I believe, in San Gabriel Valley, which sells Asian materials, and a Hong Kong-based knife maker. I had to ask my dad to help me pronounce this. It is Chun Si Gay. That's the company, which is just about stamped here. It's actually a pretty well-known knife maker. They're in an area in Kowloon, and they make very nice kind of hand-forged steel knives. What I love about this is it's not treated, as you can see, it's got a patina on it, because I've been using it, and it's meant to develop this patina from, water, from cutting stuff. But one of the things, from a really practical sense, that made me switch 100% to Chinese knives now is, if I'm chopping something, look, I can instantly scrape up my green onions and put them in a dish. It's just more efficient than a French style knife. Obviously everything has a use, but for me it was almost analogous to my switch into America of moving out of using these Western knives to 100% using Chinese style knives. And I think it's funny also, I brought this because this has also traveled all the way to America. Like, we found each other, I don't know when this was made. I can't imagine it was that long ago, but still, let's romanticize for a bit. Somewhere this metal came together, some guy with a string vest and a cigarette hanging out of his mouth, hammered this out somewhere in the back of the shop, made this, wrapped it up for California, and then I bought this. And it's like, well, somewhere my parents, met in London, and they forged me, if you will, and somehow I ended up in America, and here I am with a knife. So,
are you as sharp and dangerous as that knife is?
I hope not.
Okay.
But, depends again who you're asking.
You just reminded me, I want to get a cleaver specifically for that purpose of picking up the food that I just chopped.
Yes,
there's nothing like that. Nothing else like that.
Practical. Huh?
Exactly, and it was just in my pure ignorance and almost, pompousness. When I was in culinary college, I went home, and my mum was cooking, and I noticed for the first time she was using one knife for everything. And I was like, that's kind of weird, really. Don't you use something else to cut the veggies and then break down the meat? I was like, that's strange. And now I get it. I was like, no, I was wrong. She was right.
I'm curious, do you have a wooden block?
At home? Not at the moment. I'd like to get one eventually. Unfortunately, it's not all that sanitary of thinking of health and safety.
But it is, because end grain wood doesn't promote bacterial growth, which is odd.
Yes, you're right. Wood is antibacterial, but at some point, obviously, there is, depending on what you're cutting on the chopping block, of course, there's still bits, and depending on how well you clean it, you're actually supposed to sand it down at some point.
Yeah, I was just looking at the shape of your knife's edge, and I was like, oh, because it seems like it would fit nicely in a wooden block, right?
I'll confess, I had one of those days at work where it's like a chef's nightmare. I looked at my knife and I think someone had dropped it and he chipped the end and it didn't say anything. I was like, ah! So I had it slightly taken out of it. But that's what's also good about a knife like that. It's pretty straight edge, so you can easily repair it.
I'm curious, do you, like when you're chopping, let's say you're lining up sliced ginger and you're going to julienne it, or you're going to chop green onion.
Yes.
With a knife like that, are you hitting it, or are you like slicing ever so slightly?
Yeah, it's kind of
like versus rocking a French knife, right?
Yeah, no, I'm slicing through. Otherwise, you get those annoying accordion pieces. But I think it's more like you kind of do the thing where you bunch it up. So at the end of the day, it's like yes, yeah. I try and bunch things up. I find it easier depending on how much I'm cutting. But you got a whole length of the knife pretty much because it's flat, right? Yeah, I find it easier more kind of towards the bottom edge personally.
Oh.
Yeah.
My family, we like to watch these, I guess they're cooking videos from China. Very popular ones. There's two very popular ones, and I watch her go through all these vegetables, and she's just, hammering through it, but with such precision. And I'm like, wow, I wish that I could do it like her.
Yeah.
On the show. Kitty, I want to get into Dai Pie Dong and the inspiration for that. But let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Sometimes, even the best of us can slip up. That's why the law offices of Scott Wormuth are here to pick you back up again.
And while they strive to get you the biggest compensation possible, oh my gosh!
Their main concern is your health and recovery. They work closely with doctors and insurance companies to make sure you get the proper medical treatment.
Initial consultations are free, so give them a call.
At the law offices of Scott Wormuth, we're with you all the way.
I'm Scott Wormuth. We've been fighting for your rights for more than 40 years.
All right, we're back with Kitty. Kitty, when we come back from the break, we like to ask questions from this deck of cards called Icebreakers. And they're just another way for the audience to get to know all of us a little bit more. And you can choose to answer it or not. So here's the question. What's a skill you learned when you were young that you still use today?
That's a funny question because it depends how young are we talking about. Okay, the first thing that comes to mind is cycling. And I tell you why. I grew up on, I guess what in America we call projects, called a council estate. My parents were working class, pretty broke, but the way it works in the UK is at a certain threshold, you are given a house, a block of flats. I lived in it was pretty rough, right? It was so rough I could never play outside, and it really frustrated me as a kid. So I learned to cycle at the grand old age of 12, when my parents managed to save up, my dad working in a Chinese restaurant, and we got a house in the outskirts, and I had my first bike, and I learned to cycle by going down a curb this tall. It was so small, and I just got my balance, and I just could cycle in like 30 seconds flat. And my love affair of the two-wheel just continued from that. Like, I drove a Vespa all the way through my teenage years. I have a motorbike here in LA. You'd probably think I'm crazy. So I guess, I still use that. And I think it's a really important skill, actually, balance. You don't realize how much you need it, And it's that phrase, learning to cycle, you never forget it. It's like riding a bike. It's true, but it is something really cool that you can just unlock innately in yourself. For me, it was in 30 seconds flat. And I guess I still use it every day.
Cool. Well, one of the skills that I learned when I was younger was how to build a fire. And I was quite young, and I've made many, many fires throughout my life. And we often cook over coals when I'm with my family in Canada.
Nice.
And so my children see this, and they're very comfortable around fire at a very, very young age. And then they would watch, and they could build their own fire confidently. And I'm talking about splitting the wood and setting it up and doing all that and keeping it going. And this last winter, I observed one of my children persevering through wind, and it was freezing cold, and just getting a fire started in those conditions is really tough, right? And so that was a fun thing to see. But yeah,
That's
starting
impressive.
a fire, is one of the things I still use quite often, and now teaching my kids to do that. So, Scott.
Unfortunately, I don't have any palpable skills.
Still today?
Yeah, I mean, I know how to drive a car. I think really observing. I always, from the time I was a kid, I just like to observe. Not even get into being part of what I'm observing, but try to be outside looking in.
Sure. Well, if you're listening or watching online, what's a skill you learned when you were young that you still use today? Let us know in the comments, and we'll be sure to share it. I want to move on to learning more about Dai Pie Dong. So you obviously grew up with a lot of inspiration for Chinese cooking at home with your
Yes.
family and your father being a chef, and finding your way over here. What was the genesis of creating Dai Pie Dong here?
Well, I guess this is going to come off a bit strange. I've always just had a soft spot for pies, in a sense that this sounds almost, fantastical perhaps to Americans, but it's a really common fast food. There's a chain of pie shops that are everywhere in the UK, and it's like a national treasure to pop into one of these and get a sausage roll. It's called Greg's, and I kind of joke my pop-up to English people, it's Chinese Greg's, and I'm like, I get it now. And I'm not saying it's a fast food. That's not the point. It's just the ultimate comfort food. And for me, I always had a fantasy. I was like, I've got to do something with pies. And it never really clicked until when I was working at this restaurant in LA. Well, there was a short period of time we were relocating from one shop space to another. And I was naive. I didn't realize how the whole restaurant permitting worked in LA. It takes a long time. My boss at the time was saying, hey, it's going to take a couple of months. We'll move over. And I'm like, okay, I've got 2 months. What am I going to do? Why don't I use this to, push myself a bit and finally launch this pie pop-up that I've been meaning to do? And it made so much sense finally to do a fusion to make British-style pastries with Cantonese fillings. I mean, at that point, I'd been cooking for about 2 years at this restaurant, so I was much more confident in what was, the flavors of Cantonese cooking, just to give it a shot. So the original 3 pie flavors, I believe, was chicken and donggu. Donggu is Cantonese for shiitake mushroom. I would say that's a safe bet. It's the one that's probably the closest to chicken pot pie. But also it's using Chinese ingredients. So the chicken would be cooked with shaoxing and sesame and have a creamy base. The second OG pie was Canto beef, which again for Canto speakers is ngao lam, or a take on ngao lam, which is a really well-known kind of sweet and savory beef stew. It's quite kind of rich and umami, and just packs so much flavor, like star aniseed and cinnamon and things like that. And then the final one, which I always called a gateway pie, is the sausage roll. But I wanted to make a twist on the sausage roll, so I actually added cubes of char siu, which is obviously the famous barbecued pork meat, and just to give it these little sweet cubes of more of a Chinese essence. And I wrapped it up in puff pastry. And that puff pastry is actually based on the one in egg custard tarts, which also has a funny history. So the egg custard tart is based on the Portuguese custard tart. It's because of during the colonial times, Portugal took over Macau and brought their food with them. And everybody fell in love with these egg tarts because they're amazing. But the British being British, they're starting to make their own snacks and dim sum, and it was trendy to be seen at these or eat these things. They made their own take on it, which is kind of a mix between the Portuguese style egg custard tart and the traditional British custard tart. But the puff pastry is the Cantonese style, which is usually made of lard and kind of more, I would say, drier, crispier than the French-style puff pastry. So that's what my puff pastry is based on. So it's kind of a mix of...
Were the first two pies you mentioned, are those in a turnover type of thing? Or
yeah, they're what they call pasties in the UK, but I thought there might be a bit of maybe a bridge too far of English lexicon. I've called them hand pies, like you eat with your hand.
Yeah.
So a pasty is usually a kind of semicircular kind of,
almost like a turnover.
Like
though.
a turnover,
Yeah,
and it's got
almost.
a hand-crimped edge.
Yes, right.
And fillings inside. And I call those hot pockets for the American audience. But it's just to more easily differentiate between the two different types of puff pastry. So it's puff, which is crispy, and that's short crust pastry, which is a more crumbly and a bit more softer. Basically.
Those kind of pastries, are those actually British or are they Indian? I always associated them with an Indian taste.
You know what I think is funny? Whenever people approach me like in a farmer's market, and if there may be Mexicans or Latinos, they always go, empanadas? And I go, yes. Because everyone has a pie. Every culture does.
Okay, yeah.
Something wrapped in pastry. It's,
Where do you sell your product?
So I usually go to pop-ups around LA. So on a given weekend, I'll be at some sort of a farmer's market or some sort of a market, pop-up kind of thing. And pretty much every Friday, I'm at El Sereno Green Grocery, which is in El Sereno, just on the edge of San Gabriel Valley. And basically, I have other catering events, but it's mostly things on the weekend and pop-ups. But hopefully we'll segue to something that's a bit more permanent in the future.
I like the flaky crust. Is it called danta? Danta?
Danta, yeah.
Danta. That's the one with the
custard.
crust,
That's
right?
the custard tart, yeah.
Yeah, that's actually my favorite.
Yes, it's good.
Yeah, and I'm curious. I haven't tried your pies, but I'm very
should
curious.
have brought some. What was I thinking today?
Can you order them online, or do
If
you
you go
only
to my
sell them?
Instagram, you can see where they're available around LA. But I'm hoping in a few months to start selling them online as well.
You mentioned that the Char Siu was the gateway one. So is that the one that you would recommend for someone just starting out?
Yeah, I think if it's your first English style pie, I'd definitely recommend the sausage roll. So you get this big meaty core and you get the crispy and crunchy puff pastry. I actually serve it with Chinese mustard, which is that, quite almost horseradishy burning hot mustard. And I like it because I always knew it as English mustard. And then again, at some point I went, wait a minute, this isn't English, this is Chinese again.
Oh. When I grew up in Seattle and there were no real Chinese restaurants, but that mustard was always like a hallmark.
Yes.
You got the barbecued pork in noodles and you got the hot mustard. And I always identified it as Chinese,
Yes, and it's just sublime with that sausage roll.
I'm curious about how you learned to cook Char Siu, because if I understand correctly, like that's an art in and of itself, just being able to make Chinese barbecue.
Yes, it's definitely an art. So I used to work at a restaurant called Pearl River Deli, which was in Chinatown. Unfortunately, it's no longer open. It closed sometime earlier this year. But, that was the thing. I was a little bit too scared to go hard into a Chinese restaurant. I was like, I want to cook more contemporary Chinese. So I was looking around LA and I found this one restaurant and I saw what they were doing, which is like pork chop buns, Hong Kong cafe style, and all these amazing dishes. I went, okay, that's the place. And I, started off doing a couple of months internship there, and then they hired me full time, and I ended up almost 3 years there, like 2 and a bit, just under 3 years. Of course, one of the dishes they had there was Char Siu. So if you had Char Siu in the first 2 and a bit years of Pearl River Deli, I probably sliced it. It was me working on it. Like, it was their recipe and their technique, and I learned a lot from it. But at some point, you've got something down when you can just touch it and go like, all right, this is going to be a good one. And you can slice and have perfectly 16 ounces without even being on the scale. Like, I was really, I became one of the meat, as it were. And it is, I would say, quite an interesting, for me, psychological change. Like, I'm not good at repeating things. I'm strange in the way that I won't take the same route in and out of a place, walking or driving. I love novelty. And one of the things I had to learn is like, okay, you're not in working in PR anymore, is you don't know how to cook professionally. You just have to be humble, say that I don't know how to do this, and learn. Don't beat yourself up saying, oh, I'm an idiot or whatever. Just learn. And how you learn is by repetition, which is cooking. So I don't know how much char siu I made. If I made in a given week, how much meat did we cut? Oof, I'm going to throw this out and guess each piece of pork shoulder was probably about, let's say 5 kilos. So let's say 10 pounds. Yeah, we probably did a couple of 100 pounds of meat, if I'm calculating that correctly. So I made hundreds of pounds of char siu a week, every week for 2.5 years. I'm not sure where that translates in a 10,000 hour rule, but you certainly get to the point where you understand every little detail of what changes something to be what you're looking for. I guess that's what's interesting about cooking. You're like, what are you looking for? What's the flavor? What's the texture? And how are you going to do that repeatedly, consistently? Even one of my colleagues might cut the char siu slightly thicker so the mouth feels different, to me. But that's not good. Everything going out of that kitchen should be the same. And that was what I had to learn when I cooked professionally. Like, we're all able to make this and turn this out. How do we elevate it to be better? How do we communicate everyone in the team and just keep repeating that to make the best consistent char siu?
Do you do all your cooking yourself?
These days, now that I run my own business, I do a lot on my own, but I'm also at an interesting point where I'm scaling and learning how to, then be that teacher to somebody else is another part of cooking. Cooking is a lot about mentorship. At some point you are under an executive chef and you're learning from them, and that's actually a really fun part of cooking. Like, how many things everyone goes, oh, you can learn stuff on YouTube or you can read a book. Yeah, great. But when it comes down to have someone tell you that's not the way to do it. The char siu is going to be better if you cook it this way. And you're like, there's only one way you can know that, as someone else's experience and their willingness to share that with you. That's a really fun part of cooking. Food is culture, right? So it's an oral history literally being passed down between so many people. You learn all these techniques, and it can only really come from working with somebody else and teaching you. Yeah.
I'm curious, do you cook your char siu over charcoal?
I don't. It's just, I don't have the setup for it. But yeah, you could. Why not? It's more a matter of efficiency. My setup right now doesn't allow for something where I could use charcoal, but if you had something, the traditional char siu ovens have the charcoal, and it's like a huge thing where the meat's hanging down, and it's insane. And it's also a bit cheeky, some of the old Hong Kong ways where to get a giant basin of that honey sugar sauce, because if you baste the whole thing, sugar is cheaper than meat. It's going to increase the weight of the meat, so when you slice it, you can give away less to the customer.
I only learned of that technique watching on YouTube, and this was like a Michelin-starred place in, I think, Singapore. And they had these huge, I don't even know if they're called ovens, but they would hang the meat in there, and there was charcoal at the bottom. It was just filled with like, it was dark all the way around, but they would pull them out, and I tried to make char siu once, and we try to avoid food coloring.
Oh, right.
Do you use red miso? You use the fermented red?
I use the red tofu, the fermented tofu, to give the red. But if you look at the jar, you'll realize why it's red. It has a type of rice. It's a red rice. That's the natural coloring in it. Some people like to color it red because it looks a bit more dramatic and, it looks pretty. But then you might get a bowl of ramen and you're like, why is the soup gone red? Yeah, you don't want to eat that.
I'm really thrilled to learn that, because that's like such a detail that, if you care about what you're serving people, like you would care about that, right? And I'm careful what we're feeding our family and what we're ingesting. So what an awesome thing to learn.
Yeah. I guess it's kind of funny with that. I'm not sure quite the history why is it red. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head right now. I'd have to look into it. But it is a defining feature of it. And I'm not saying it's wrong, but there's different styles of cooking it where if they want to, exaggerate that almost because they feel that's an important part of it, power to them,
Have you tried any other flavors of meat pie?
In my life? Or?
Oh, I'm creating.
Oh,
other
right,
than those
okay.
three.
So those are hand pies, but like in my heart, pies are meant to be eaten sitting down, right? With a glass of beer. That would be my ideal setup. So there's a few pies I think Americans aren't always familiar with. Okay, let's go with the simple one, shepherd's pie. So that's a pie insofar as it's meat with potato on top, right? And usually the potato is baked and develops this lovely golden crispy, top. So I made a Uyghur style shepherd's pie because lamb is not typical in Cantonese cooking, right? It can be a little, let's say, grassy or kind of flavor. Like not everyone is into it. So one of the distinct parts of Western Chinese cooking is Uyghur style Muslim influenced Chinese cooking. And they have a lot of lamb. One of the most famous dishes they have in that region is a cumin kind of lamb that is stir-fried, and it's absolutely amazing. And it made so much sense for me to take, a page out of that, using the meat, and make a Uyghur-style shepherd's pie, basically. So I have a dish that's like that. So it has lamb cooked down with cumin and spices, and I foregoed the alcohol because traditionally you wouldn't put alcohol in a Muslim dish, would you? So I didn't use the Shaoxing to, with the meat. Another dish, which is a pie that is a nod towards vegetarianism. So I had a vegetarian friend, and she's like, for the love of God, I don't want another cheese and onion pie for vegetarian people. What could you offer me that's more interesting? And we had a little think about it, and I went, oh, it's got to be mapo tofu. That can be a vegetarian dish. And you know what? Initially, I went, you're mad. How can I bake tofu? That's going to be weird. So I popped it all in, that bean paste. It's very umami. It's very spicy. It has that mala from the Sichuan. Threw in cubes of tofu, wrapped it up in a pastry, and I went, here we go. And it actually turns out perfectly. You get this creaminess of the tofu. It's retained inside with the mapo sauce in a pie. And it becomes actually one of my most popular ones because it's spicy, it's got a lot of flavor, and it's not boring, especially if you're a vegetarian.
Yeah, that sounds good. I mean, I love tofu. And that sounds like a good one. And it'd be crispy on the outside.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of anything else. Sometimes I do sweet pies. Being Chinese, sweet things are not always on my radar. But
do you do the custard, the dan
yes,
ta?
I do. I don't do dan ta, but I do a kind of take on it. I make custard-filled pies, and I usually take like Asian flavoring. So I've done a recent one of taro. I did that one that's based on white rabbit, which is a famous candy that a lot of I can see you nodding. A lot of Chinese people love, which is basically just a way to, inject condensed milk directly into your bloodstream, but it works. And there's just so many other pies I can explore. Actually, here's a funny one. Last year was Year of the Rabbit, right? And I made rabbit-shaped pies, but I thought it would be wrong to put rabbit in a pie. If it's Year of the Rabbit, surely the rabbit should have a reprieve this year. So my mind got wandering. What am I going to put in these rabbit-shaped pies? And it made me think of Warner Brothers. Daffy Duck and Bugs Bunny were always fighting. They were like, duck season, rabbit season, duck season, rabbit season. And I went, okay, if it's rabbit season, it's got to be duck in there, right? So inside, I basically made Cantonese style roasted duck. And I made a kind of duck jus, so that the meat was inside, and it was in these little rabbit-shaped pies. And they were very popular for Chinese New Year.
Oh, that sounds really good.
Yeah. And very creative.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, Kitty, thank you for sharing those other creations that you do with your offerings. But we're going to move on to the final segment of the show where we get to learn more about what you like in the San Gabriel Valley.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So, Kitty, this is what we call the SGV3, and we get to learn your 3 favorite or most memorable places or experiences in the San Gabriel Valley. So, Kitty, what would be number 1?
Okay, so the first place I would like to mention, I guess, is called 626 Hospitality Ice Cream. They are, it's Amber and Waldo. That's their ice cream shop. And they're one of the most generous, kindest people you'll ever meet in hospitality. And they've been making ice cream, I'm not sure, for maybe the last couple of years that I've known them, probably longer than that. And eventually their ice cream has been so popular, they've opened up their own stall. And I think what's great about it is, yes, it's an ice cream shop, but there's this kind of hidden community element to it, where the fact that you can go somewhere late at night and kind of just sit, have an ice cream and chill out.
Where is it?
It's on 160 East, is it Duarte Road?
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. So
Arcadia.
right near Baldwin, probably. Yeah.
They host community events. Like they had a car meet recently, even though it was raining. And I don't know, there's just something just so wonderful about not only creating a stall with your fantastic product. They make a soft serve exclusively for their shop, which, has amazing flavors like calamansi and things like that.
What is that?
It's a type of fruit. It's, I believe, citrus, right?
Yeah.
That has a kind of unusual kind of floral flavor. Yeah, as much as citrus. It's fantastic, yeah.
I think it's popular in Filipino cuisine. Like
that's right.
they use it quite often. They squeeze it over their food a lot. It's like very, very sour though, I think.
Yeah, obviously they've sweetened it for an ice cream. Yeah, it's the raw calamansi. It's citrus after all. It's definitely got a tang to it.
Yeah. Do you remember? So Brian Chow of Asian Youth Center, he was one of our guests at your place. He brought us ice cream. Do you remember? Remember that, Tori?
I don't remember.
So it was from them before they had their brick and mortar, and the flavors were really like Asian and very unique.
Definitely. Like I think one of my favorite pint ice creams they serve is one that's made from the mash of which is usually cast out of making sake. So when you ferment the sake, you are left over with this kind of I don't remember the name of it, byproduct, and they found a way to mix it into their ice cream, which gives it that kind of sake-ish, delicacy that just gives a little bit more of a twist to their, ice cream base. It's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I saw on social media that they were recently broken into, or like their shop was.
Yeah,
that's really unfortunate.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. The drama of having a shop in LA, unfortunately, twice I think.
Oh wow!
But I think they're doing okay. They've got lots of community support, and I think they're okay right now. But yeah, I like I said, it's not just the ice cream. It's the fact that they do all these community activities and rally people and bring people together. Like, one of the things I do find a bit difficult about LA is you have to know where you're going. You don't just congregate anywhere. You don't just walk down the street and find a new shop. You really need to know. And so that they call them third spaces, right? First space is home, second space is work or office. I mean, who knows what's going on with second space at this point of, the work landscape. But the third space is places outside of that where you meet people. And because it's so prescribed in LA, sometimes it's difficult to get people out to go there, But they're making that space, and I really appreciate that that's, a second kind of pillar to their ice cream store.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great choice.
Mm-hmm.
So what would be a second?
A second one, I think, is more, a lot of places for San Gabriel Valley for me are, full of memories of, hanging out with my friends. So I had a friend leave to join the army recently. It's almost 6 months ago, more than that now. And the last place he went to, he recommended, was a rice noodle restaurant. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing this right. It's Ayi Rice Noodles Roll in the City of Industry. It's really unassuming in a strip mall, but they make these freshly made rice rolls, and they're absolutely, phenomenally good. They have other stuff on the menu, just don't even bother. Just get 10 rice rolls.
How do you spell it?
It's Ayee.
Okay.
I don't think it stands for anything. I tried to look on the website and I was like, I don't know. But it's, I think there's two, but there's one that I went to is in the City of Industry on Gale Avenue.
What is a rice roll?
So a rice roll is a noodle that is usually made in this big steam pan, usually square. And it's rice flour, I guess, with some other stuff in it. And what happens is they pour this into this squarish pan, and they steam it. And because it's super thin, it steams pretty quickly. You can see it kind of bubbling away when it's done. And they roll it. And it's very like smooth, slippery, sometimes hard to pick up with your chopsticks. But it's a really delicious, traditional, almost dim sum or type of noodle. Oh, and they usually wrap it with things like char siu or beef or shrimp. It's so good.
Oh, I know what this is. What's the Cantonese name for it?
You put me on the spot now. It's completely
sorry.
It's
But it is offered, like it's offered with the sweet soy sauce.
sometimes
right?
it is. Yeah, that's
Okay.
right. Oh, it's completely escaped me. I just don't know. I just don't know. It's 'cause-
I know what you're talking
Right.
about
Yeah,
too.
it's completely escaped
Right.
right now.
What?
So it must be goon, which is roll.
Yeah.
Mine is not. Mine is uncooked. Fan. This sounds
Well,
wrong.
I'm okay because I'm not Cantonese.
Yeah, no. My mom's gonna tell me off now.
And what would be a third place, Kitty?
All right, and the third place I really like is also a place of memory. Now, every Christmas at home in the UK, my parents would always do hot pot because it's cold, especially in the UK, and you're around the hot pot. Now, we just don't have as many Asian people, so we don't even have these giant hot pot restaurants. And I went to this. It's called Happy All You Can Eat Hot Pot, right? It's off Valley Boulevard, so I think it's quite close to here actually. And I went in there and I was like, this is the Willy Wonka's factory of hot pot. Every table you get your own hot pot. How luxurious! I don't share with my friend who's got horrible taste in like contents, and it was just perfect. We went for Christmas last year, and I just ate so much that I regretted it, you know. But the fact that, you know, at the end of hot pot, you get that stock made of all the stuff you cooked in it. Then you eat the instant noodles and they soak up all the stock. You're like, this is so good. This is living. So I think most of my hot pot was just mussels, endless mussels. So yeah, I really was flabbergasted. And that was existing here.
You were gabsmacked.
Yeah, gobsmacked.
Oh, gobsmacked.
That's a spoonerism, right? When you put them
Okay.
other way around.
Okay, yeah. Well, I've never learned English, so.
That's all right.
You were really excited about that, reliving that experience.
Yeah.
I'm sure it can come across on the
I mean,
audio only as well.
It was just so good.
You like mussels then, huh?
Yeah, I feel like my liver must be 90% mercury at this point. But yeah, I probably caused some kind of mussel genocide in my life.
Well, Kitty, thank you so much for
Yes.
coming on the show and sharing your journey with us and your interest in cooking. If people want to get some of your pies or just get in touch with you, what are the best ways to do that?
So if you want to get in touch with me or find my pies, the best place would be to look me up on Instagram. I'm at Dai Pie Dong _LA. I guess we could put that in a super, right? Yeah, and you...
How do you spell that?
Oh, yeah, I'll spell it out. So that's spelt DAIPIE DONG _LA.
Yeah. Awesome. Kitty, thank you so much for
Thank
coming
you.
on the
Yes,
show.
it was
We
a delight.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Well, there you go. Another episode in the books for you. Those all sounded really delicious, and I'm excited to go try them out. Definitely go check them out. Follow her on Instagram and let us know what you think of them. I always enjoy learning what people like or find about the San Gabriel Valley. Sometimes it's food, and sometimes it's something more than that. So I know how special this place is to me. I know how special it is to the people who live here and all of our guests, and it's always a joy to be able to share what other people find in their journey to the San Gabriel Valley. If you like this kind of content, please consider subscribing. Don't forget to like and share this. If you want to see our full back catalog of episodes, check out our website, mysgv.net, and check out some merch, buy some merch on our shop there. And until next week, we'll see you then.
Don't forget the newsletter, Russell.
Oh, yeah. So, I've been doing a newsletter for maybe 2 months now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I write it, and I just share some of my own insights about living here, growing up here. I introduce the next upcoming episode and the guest whose show is to drop on Tuesday. So the newsletter comes out on Monday, and I share the guest. And I share the wins from Instagram, because there's been some incredible wins there as well. So
how do they subscribe to the newsletter if they'd like to?
Oh, I believe I share a link in Instagram stories. There may be something online, but I'm not sure. Yeah. So we'll put something up there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a well-written newsletter. I enjoy it every week, and I already kind of know a lot of what's happening, but it's well written. It's interesting. Yeah, I would really recommend it.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. And
Yeah.
thank you for spending this time with us. I really do appreciate it. I do look and see all the comments and the DMs of you guys saying that you appreciate what we do. And thank you so much for supporting us. And until next week, we'll see you then.
Thank you for joining us on the My SGV podcast. Check out more of our content on our website, mysgv.net. This show was produced by Russell Mono and edited by Victoria Allers of Kind Monster Productions. If you'd like to join us next week as we capture and share more stories from our diverse community, feel welcome.
Nice mother. No, kind mother.